Major Jose Guzman, a longtime member of the Eastern Territory Hispanic Ministries Committee, has said, "The way we see anything is determined by the way we have been formed as individuals within groups in society. A lack of understanding of others can become an obstacle to a celebration of diversity." 1 Peter 2:10 says, "Once you have no identity as a people, now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy, now you have received God's mercy." In its context, this passage is for all of us who were once not people of God, but were brought into His family by the wondrous grace of Christ. Hispanic salvationists in the Eastern Territory might view this passage in a different way. Large numbers of immigrants began coming to the mainland, mostly to New York City, from Puerto Rico, soon after the island came under the control of the United States in 1898, following the Spanish-American War. Other Hispanic peoples have also been part of this country for a very long time, coming from the Dominican Republic, Cuba, South and Central America, and Mexico. By 1970, the first year for which these statistics are available, the Hispanic population of New York metropolitan area have grown to over 1.2 million. Yet it was not until 1957 that the Salvation Army began any work specifically aimed at Spanish-speaking people. This work resulted in the reopening of the Bronx Citadel Corps, which had been closed as the Bronx Spanish-American Corps in 1960. In 1962, the same year that the Salvation Army work opened in Puerto Rico, a Hispanic outpost was dedicated in Rochester, New York, under the direction of two officers who had fled the Castro regime in Cuba. Hispanic ministries began in Spanish Harlem in 1964 and in Brooklyn in 1972. Surely it must feel that it took the Salvation Army a very long time to recognize the Hispanic community as a people. Add to this the complexity and diversity of the Hispanic communities, and it is clear that we have a lot of catching up to do. This catching up is not only about the support of Hispanic ministries. It also has a lot to do with understanding, the kind of understanding Mayor Guzman talks about. In 1993, the Eastern Territory established the Territorial Hispanic Ministries Committee to help the territory to catch up. They have done a lot of work, but there is still much work to do.
In 2001, I was appointed to New Jersey, and I was an envoy actually in New Jersey, and I was one of the first liaisons for the divisions with the Hispanic liaisons, so that's when I was appointed to the Hispanic Committee. And as a liaison, I was in charge of overseeing the Spanish Corps and just being a voice, for the divisional commander, for the divisional leadership on what was happening in the Corps in New Jersey. It's a big Spanish population in New Jersey. I would translate every divisional event and get other translators to help. And that was my job. And I visited all the Corps. I did Sunday school in one Corps cadets in another, but just to be able to recognize and help. And it was part of what the committee had recommended, and the divisional commander then, Colonel Wood, was very open to that, so he would listen. I didn't feel like I was doing something and nobody was listening. The territory wanted to hear what was happening in the growth. They knew it was growing fast. So in order to do that, they needed to hear from different divisions, different people, not just one or two voices. So that's how that committee was created. It was very supported by the territorial leadership. So that makes a big difference. When that happens, then things can happen.
I think it was 95 that I was appointed to the Hispanic Committee. And so just to talk about issues and let our voice be heard on what was going on with something pretty new to the territory, because Corps were being opened in different areas of the territory.
My husband and I were appointed in 1993 to Hispanic Corps, Holyoke, Massachusetts. And there we spent 8 years. It was a good 8 years of training. But we were new to the Army, first generation Salvationists. And I believe it was in 94, 95 that I was appointed to the Hispanic Committee. And there, I took on the role of secretary, not knowing a lot yet about the Army or even the Hispanic ministry within the Salvation Army. I was able to learn a lot through the committee. And I feel that in being part of that committee, I was part of a voice to be heard. You know, a voice expressing the Hispanic officers and soldiers on the field our needs. So that committee was a vehicle that was used in order for our voices to be heard.
I was born, raised, and educated in Puerto Rico. I met the Salvation Army in Puerto Rico, where we have a lot of officers. Some of them were local Puerto Rican officers, others were from South America. Our headquarters was mostly officers from the States, mostly Anglo officers. So we have a little bit of mix of things. Over there, we are all Puerto Ricans. The concept of minority is strange to us. And I come here, and I am called a minority. So what is that? But then I learned other Hispanics that have grew up here in the States, and they understood that concept very well. So I have to learn from them. There are historical facts that have taken place here in the States, just like in Puerto Rico, and that those things define what people are and how people behave and how people address each other. Me, as not having that concept of minority, I could have been seen as I don't know my place, which that's the way I felt many times when I was dealing with Anglo officers or headquarters. You don't know your place. You're a minority. The way we felt was like, if you don't sound like us or look like us, you are not like us, and you are less than us. And unless you come to this place, then you have to be in your place. That has been reduced through the years. We still have it in some pockets here and there. Some officers still, because they haven't had that experience with other cultures, with other people that are different.
At the beginning, it had its moments. I think there was a time, I remember the conversation, there was a time of, do we continue with this committee? Is this even worth it? Is anybody really listening? But mom and dad just, pressed on, and they were like, yes, we will. If they're not listening now, they will listen. So I think it has a lot to do with our own attitude. If we go with an attitude of, we're going to press on until we're heard, and do it the right way, I think that eventually you are being heard. But if I think if we would have gone the other way of claiming we're being discriminated, we're not being heard, things would have gone another way. So pressing on is always helpful, and in love, expressing your needs and what needs to happen. And they were very, very much heard and very well heard, and the committee was heard.
Discussion during that time was the dual roles that the officers had as assisting the English-speaking corps and opening a Hispanic corps, and not all the time everything was equal. That was part of the discussion. How can we get the opportunity and be listened to about some of these issues, and then we took that back to the divisions and had the conversations at that time.
You have an Anglo officer with a corps and a congregation that has been in a place for decades, maybe a whole century, and all of a sudden you place there Hispanic officers with a Hispanic congregation, and they start having conflicts. Who owns what? especially from the Hispanic side, who do I respond to? To the DC? Or do I respond to the Corps officer of the Anglo Corps? In my particular situation, I had signals from territorial leadership. You are, in that particular first Hispanic Corps, you are a Corps. And then at the local level, the Corps officer said, no, you're not a Corps. And at the divisional level, you're not a Corps. In my particular case, I didn't have an office. I had to fight to get office space. That's a struggle that we had to go through to get established. For example, we wanted to do an evangelistic campaign. It's part of the Army requirement to do evangelistic campaigns. At that time, we had, the requirements that we had to fulfill. All Corps had to do it. And we wanted to do that, and we needed the evangelistic campaign. And I would have, like the other officers say, well, you better rent a place to have that, because we're using our space. And my congregation would say, what? Why do we have to do that? We are the Salvation Army. This is our place.
I have seen some subliminal discrimination. It's sad to say, but it's not everyone. And we have prayed, and God heals. And we continue to pray, because the fact is that there still might be. And with this army, which is an army of diversity, and now in the appointment that I'm in, I just feel that God has blessed me in such a greater way, because I'm exposed to even more diversity. And it's a beautiful thing. It sure is a beautiful thing.
I think that we would work better together in that. Okay, is this a Corps now that was Anglo, but everybody, we have the proof in Spring Valley, the Corps when I was a cadet, everybody around Spring Valley, they had just started to see, new immigrants, but it was an Anglo Corps. But now you have 3 different congregations in the same building, because it's meeting the needs of those around the building. Again, it's a challenge. You have 3 different sets of officers. It's a huge challenge. And how are we going to work together? And how are we going to get our congregations to work together? And the solution is not to just put everybody in one room and give translation equipment. That's not going to work. It might work for a meeting or 2, but the solution is, we can do stuff together, we can work together, but let me go to a Haitian meeting. Let me go to an English meeting. Let me go to a Spanish meeting. Let's worship together. If you have 20 people that speak English and 60 that speak Spanish, and you have Corps officers that are bilingual, there is no reason why you have to do it in English and use translation for 60 people. Let's switch that, because, there's a lot less people that you need to translate for, but you're still translating. But I think the view is still, no, if you're the Hispanic, you get the translation equipment. I know that sounds so silly, but it just says something different.
It's quite different when you can express your worship in the context of your culture. And it's quite different to be able to receive the word in your own language, which we appreciate translation, but it's never the same. So giving the Hispanic community that opportunity of having leadership seminars, of having praise and worship meetings, different trainings was an asset. And we appreciate that opportunity.
I think we need to continue to grow, because Hispanic populations continue to grow. We need to see what type of ministry do we need for a specific community, and then work with that. And I think this is where the committee comes in, and is developing that vision. So maybe you don't need a Corps in this community, and but you can do something else. So I think one of the areas where the community can be very helpful is developing practical ideas of what a Hispanic ministry looks in a certain community. We've opened core over the year that perhaps needed something else.
Well, I believe the officers themselves, the Hispanic officers, and seeing opportunities that have been opened up to us with events that are in Spanish. I believe that the officers have a lot to gain, and also soldiership. When we have events that are held solely in Spanish for them, they benefit greatly from that. So, yeah, I believe that many have been benefited from having a Hispanic committee.
I learned something a long time ago. You gotta address the head, the hands, and the heart of the Hispanic community. You know, you have to reach them intellectually. You have to, reach their hands, and how do we apply the truth of the gospel and as salvationists to face the issues that we face every day in a biblical perspective and the methods that the Army used, and also reach the heart. Because especially Hispanics, we are very emotional. Sometimes we have a lot of problems separating personal things from professional things. Sometimes we cannot be as objective as you could see within the Anglo culture. So all those things, you need to know the culture.
One of the other challenges that we had was that there was no material in Spanish. There were translations of doctrine manual in Spanish, but they were extremely old. So it was a challenge there.
Being part of the training college, I'm still voicing about, and it's the fact that we don't want to wait a year or two for the translation to come out. If a new program was to come out, I remember when the Sunbeam program was, the Girl Guard program was renovated or redone, the Corps cadets, we had to wait for a long period of time to have the material in Spanish. So you had not just the Spanish ministries here in the States, which could do with the English more because the kids usually would speak English, but the ministry in Puerto Rico where they had to wait a year or two for the new material to come out. We're still dealing, with that, I think, but not as much as we were then. It was taking a long time for the Spanish materials to come out. So then they proposed for someone here at territorial headquarters to do the translation, a translation department or something of that sort. And has been very helpful. Now, Orange has just happened for Sunday school, and that was immediately translated into the Spanish language.
I haven't been a direct part of it, but I have seen, the transformation of materials being translated. And I know with Sunday school it was an issue, but with Orange, now it's better. Different publications are in Spanish as well.
Then we started addressing the issues of the publications of the Army. Because we received a war cry from Mexico, which it was good. It's in Spanish, but it didn't relate to us in this territory. So we were called to make recommendations. Sometimes it takes years to, the recommendations are made, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10 years later, things are implemented. So, we've seen progress in that. Now the war cry I just saw the last war cry has something in Spanish, the national. So there are things that have been changed and have been addressed. So the Hispanic ministries and members of those ministries, they feel members of the Salvation Army, feel part. We are all together.
And I think the Hispanic liaison was really a good decision. Sometimes the Spanish officers don't speak English. Sometimes they don't know who to talk to. And so they would have that person at the HQ who spoke their language and who could say, okay, you have to call this department or that department, and will be a voice. So it was less of a supervision, more of a helping hand.
I was appointed as a liaison in Massachusetts Division, and I think that was an excellent opportunity for Hispanics ministries to grow and to develop, and soldiers to grow and develop.
The Hispanic liaisons were helpful. I think that those should come back. I think that it helps in many different ways for the divisions and the territory, and that they should be part of the committee and what is going on, so that you have a voice in every single division. And again, not just 2 or 3 voices. I think that we all need to be heard, and we all have our different ideas of what this should look like. And that's why we need as many voices as possible to be heard, and to not be afraid to have some leadership in Spanish. There are some people that are capable. Just because you don't speak the language or you have an accent doesn't mean that you're not educated.
The Hispanic Committee, I think, is going to be invaluable in the next years, especially with the influx of people from Puerto Rico after the hurricane. I think the fact that you have a group of people that are focused on the same goal helps tremendously. And over the years, you've had different people in one committee. You've had different people over the years in one committee taking the same vision back to the divisions. And when you have that group of people going back to the officers, whether it's in an official meeting or it's over coffee, whatever is discussed in the committee, you sit down and you say, you know what, we talked about this. What do you think about this? What can we do to make this happen? When can we get together as a division or 2 corps and bring our families together and celebrate what's going on with I think with the Hispanic community, you look for stability and you look for community. And over the years, this is something that people from other denominations and people that have never met the Lord have found in the Salvation Army.
But because, of the slow pace, I guess, it seems like it's been a long time. But as time progresses, I see that there is more improvement, and our voices are being heard, and not only being heard, but acted upon. So we appreciate administration for that.
As the Hispanic liaison and part of the committee, I wanted, those of us who were in the committee wanted to be heard, wanted to make sure we were heard, and wanted to make sure that we were part of the solution. So the committee took it upon themselves to train not just our Spanish people and our officers, but also say we need training for those of us that will be working with us as well, and we need to change our attitude. I know that our specific time in the committee that I was in, it was talked around the table. We need to change our attitude from victims to let's work this out. How do we get people to hear us, and how do we do it better, and how do we train our own congregations to be accepted of everyone? We're seeing enough changes to know that things will improve and continue to improve. And a big percentage of that is the committee.
I think great things and great days are ahead, especially as we continue to see Hispanic candidates coming in. I talk about my appointment. As we see Hispanic candidates coming in, great days are coming ahead with Hispanic ministries with enough people to be able to not only cover the cores that we have, but also be able to be adventurous and to other locations and areas and start ministering and showing people that the Army continues to care for diversity in our territory.
I dream with an army that all of us officers and we see all as equals. Some people always say, that's almost impossible. We always have this, but we can improve, and that everyone will have the same opportunities. As I said in the quote that you mentioned at the beginning, I want better understanding of who we are. Something that we didn't mention that what is a challenge now. There are some immigration issues which our national government has been addressing in whatever the way they think is correct. I think have made a lot of people scared, people hiding. Some people are not coming to the core. We have something that we use uniform. I have to tell the Hispanics, I'm not the migra. I'm not the, immigration services, But it's scary for many Hispanics to look for help, to come out of the shadows. Those that were in the shadows, they're moving back into the shadows. I hope that the Army continue the ministry as we've been doing now and tell people, we are not about immigration. We are about the love of Christ. You are accepted here. We want you to be one of us. We want to have Christ in your heart and lead your families to Christ. We don't get caught in all these discussions with the immigration, but we just continue to offer the love of Christ.
The ideal and the dream for the Hispanic ministries is that one day we get to the point where it's a ministry, maybe no longer Hispanic ministry. The idea would be that we are not called on by our culture, but just by the ministry that is happening. The ministry in Spring Valley, the ministry in Allentown, the ministry in Bethlehem, wherever it may be. But it's not the Spanish Corps, the English Corps, just the ministry. I think that is the ideal, that we can all work together, that we can all, and I think that's the ideal in many different ways as well, but that we can work together, no longer feel like secondhand citizens, or that we're less than, or that we're not capable. And I think that the Army and the leadership are doing a great job on getting there. We're not there yet.
So our challenge is to keep moving forward, and of course expressing our appreciation as well. Because not everything can be, we don't want to put it in form of complaints at all. We just want to express our needs, and we want to be heard, and we want to feel that this is a all-encompassing Army, that I don't know if there ever be a perfect Army, but that we can all appreciate diversity, because that's how it's going to be in heaven.
Because, the message is for all. And salvation is for all. And we need to let people know that. It doesn't matter what language you speak, what ethnic background you have, Christ is for you. We emphasize in many solutions, and the government looks for many solutions, and the world looks for many solutions. We have the answer, and the answer is Christ. It doesn't matter where you come from, your religious background, Christ is the answer.